다 년카가 쇼라 this 기제 쉐어와 이스탄불이야 아니 다 드라지스 다 담보텔라야 안전에 소비카사 리치싱이 세데 시치네 야부 인사레 삼로와 엔단단 디나도 네탄 데시장 스탄불이야 알레 다티 야부 인사마레 세니야 치 수수가 따슬런 지로 정제 디나도 요에스 요나 라바장로 제사
Okay, so I'm changing some minds. Very interesting. So at the very end of the class, we'll take a poll to see what everyone thinks.
아하, 다단다 카시 찍게 삼로라 저도 스테샤스는 다단가순 전자데 트립이 참들라 양생아 속에 양 삼쇼치 되지 네 간다로 지지도 다게인스 전자 초용 그 다츠들라 저와 간다 친도 다게인스
During our break, one of your peers, where are you, asked about organic food.
Yeah.
Yes.
The last one.
So the question is, if something is organic, if you go to the supermarket and it says organic something, organic apples, organic broccoli, anything, is that GMO?
다단다 겐치 케자트송 게로 라존 라그로와 단다 케자카트송 시스템발아야 가츠게 organic 살로 지den기 로토치로와 지den 로토스그로다 지den 수넘스그도라 드라 지된 로토데 아니 단다 리치기 싱에 에레스 테나나 요르웨 티가 파르라 데와카르 요레스 케제트 송스
By definition, if something is organic, it should not have any GMO components.
당가 수기 진댕기 로토 임바이나스 지된 로토로와 지된 로토데 임바이나 코 랑신 코랑기 체니라 텐데데 아니 코 리치 싱에 마임바치 인구레스
But what we know also is that some corporations can be quite sneaky, and they sell something as organic that does contain certain GMO components, which is why labeling, which is the picture that I showed before with that tomato, with the labeling, is so important to know exactly what we are getting when we buy a product.
야 티레스 다 거기 전에 답안에 따라다 있네면 가시게 야 진댕게 로또 된다 인 진댕게 신도 된다 인 세주게 야 쇼라야 그숨숨 된다 양고 리치기 징이 된다로 종이 되나 요레스 데스탄발아야 아니 가라야 퍼텐 데시자바난신 레스 또 거기 지금 민상 다 지거와 콜라야 민트야 지거와 데이터 하진 게 개첨부 차요레스 데티나나 가리 요메지거와 디 하진 개첨부 차요레스
So somebody also mentioned a little while back about fertility of the soil, and this is also a concern when it comes to GMO production, because biotechnology and its application does have several consequences on the environment, some that can be good, but others that can be quite negative.
다 대응을야 지게 리치기 징에 대라 텐데 대nga 수그 사기 줄라로 사줄라야 수진 되그레세 대 종송스다 대고 요레스다 단단가 수그 리치기 징에 대라 텐데 아니 가 살라야 사줄라야 아니 수진 되야 된다 요레스 수진 카치는 야보된레스 임바나야 대라 텐베기 수진 엠바되나 요레스
So we have established, okay, we can make corn that is GMO, we can make more of it. It's going to be resistant to very high temperatures. Great. We can make tons of it. We can feed the poor. But, okay, so that is a huge benefit for us. But what is the benefit for the environment? And that is a very important question.
다 단단가 수가 리치 징글라테 리치기 징글라테네 데탄가 수가 마밀로토 엠바나 리치 데타 맘포치 체텐치 바 맘포치 턴치 바 미 맘포치라야 칼라테트가 네탄데 차고요레스 임바이나야 가술라 키펜데다 티 키펜게테네 데바만 티나도 키펜치요레스 임바나 틸라테네 데타 아니 거기라 키펜카리라 그래서 대양 삼노탄고레스
Some evidence due to research and other applications that are empirically based on science have shown, at least to a certain degree, that growing GMO products can lead to a loss of biodiversity.
단다 탁시카치 드요레 탁시카치 뎁난 드심바레 단다가 수가 리치기 로토테나로 테발라테네 데타 리치기 로토라테네 데테 나수게 다 징위게 나초랑신 주어라 나초랑신티 진용된 루고요바 엔테요레스
Why is it so? Because when we create a GMO product such as corn, and I keep going back to corn for me to drive the point. If we make corn that is GMO, we want to make it pure, and which we call a monoculture. If we grow a monoculture and we have many plots of the monoculture, we start to neglect the wild strains of corn, and that biodiversity is going to continue to be lost.
아하 다 단다데 nge pichunde sha de tanda nga su ta gasa mamilu to kona chigi yus ta mamilu to kona cheba de yang ko ge ka netse de khase uzu ya ge te yinsta ta tanda dinda ge ruchi gi chengwe mamilu to te ruchi gi mamilu to te de bala tene de tan de ge netan de kar yong kore sena nga su de la riching dem zik sa chdo ri kan chi tep de chi gorwa richi tep de batela tene de ne nga su rangshong la yo pi rangshin te chi pi richi gi mamilu to la so pa ta mamilu to ko richi ende ti samala ya nangme te tang du yores nangme te tang bala tene de ta ani kho ge ta chi na chu rangshin chi mampu chi gorwa tu kale kale lagai gi nyang ka ti yores.
If we continue on our focus on making those monocultures, guess what happens? The stability and chemistry of the soil drops, and the soil ultimately becomes infertile. So we can't grow other products except those monocultures, which are not very diverse.
Aha. Ta tinda do nga su mat te pa na ko depsa ge saja te ge saju nyam de ti wa saju nyam de ti ne saja te ga la ya ta tanda ge rikchi dem zik tanda lo to ti chi pu te na ma to pe jen dem nye ge ane ne tan tin cha gres.
So, ever since the emergence of GMOs 20, 30 years ago, they have always been controversial. And as Chris stated before our break, our science, our research on them is fairly new. So there is still a lot of data that we don't have and we still ignore when it comes to this particular topic.
Aha, ta tanda de richi go to te thonchi chingu chu pa ne da ko thonchi che che lo nyu su sum chi chi ma shin ro yo ma re sum go chu pa ne ko ga la ya zo nyu chi cha cha pa ro re sro da de ge la gen Chris so na jin ko sa wa yin zang ko ge da sim ji tang tang thu de mang bu me sta ba la ya ne ko tha che tang din ne ta te chu cham yo ko ma ro dis tam ba la ka tu ba na zo nyu tang ro lang ge ne chi cha ga yo re.
There is a potential for something called horizontal gene transfer, right? That is when there is the transfer of, let's say, a gene from one species to another within the same population, within the same generation, sideways, not from parental to offspring, but rather from neighbor to neighbor. And this has been occurring in GMO examples, such as wild corn and GMO corn.
Aha, ta tanda dila tene de tir wa dila do chong bala tene de ta nga sula ya rizzi ge ta ko te kar sa thechep ti jungore DNA thechep ti jungore sta picha se banan de ge thechep ti kar sa DNA te ne nga su kar sa ta te phaman pugile chepa nang ji mai ba ani korang ge ta chin dam la yo pe ge ni ri tu ko la phat sa chap go res te ka chap go res na ne rizzi ge mamilo to ko rizzi te wa DNA te ani korang shong ge mamilo to chi go wa te la pha chap ye ge ne ta de jungore.
And just like what we saw with COVID, you have the emergence and mixing of different genes in different species. We have the emergence of this deadly virus, which led to a pandemic. We could potentially see growth of all kinds of novel bacteria and novel viruses as a consequence of the horizontal transfer of genes between species.
Aha, ta tanda dila ro ge thechap chi gor wa DNA thechap tela tene de te nga su ka tanda dila ta bar wa karsa ane coronavirus la ta yor corona ge nyen sen tela ta yor tin nang sing ge ane dus thechap tela tene de te ne chi nga su la ya ane ko ta de novel de ko ane karsa ta busin ta simbu ta nyen sen tela ro ko chi chap chmu ko ne che ta chap ko ne yu ge ne ta tena ro jong se grace.
So if there is an unintentional transfer, horizontal transfer of genes, we could potentially produce strains of herbs or weeds which are highly resistant and are very difficult to kill, which would essentially kill the agriculture within our society.
Aha, ta dinda do ge ko DNA thechep ji wala tene de te yang ga chu de la ya chep science tan chep pom business ge do wa ta dinda do jong se pare dinda do jong ba ba na dinda do chi ta so ya ta same ta la ha chang kha pu cha ge ne ta dinda do jong se pare.
So you could already get an idea that this is a very controversial topic with lots of concerns regarding to food safety as well as human safety.
Aha, ta tanda che su thong yo res nga su ge richi ge singwe de ko zonyo cheng ge jo shi chi ge imba de thong yo res ta zo de samte chi sa de ka res na nga su sir ke den ja ta mi ge den ja la ya ani kana ro chu to phon ro res te ga la samte chi chi go res.
So we can also ask, well, what is the association between GMOs and modern medicine?
Aha, ta tanda nga su ge senda ka ta yo res na richi ge singwe ta ane ten re bu ge men chi go ro te ge paro la ya de ka yo re te tan res.
We can certainly genetically modify different types of medicine for curing ailments across human populations, especially in parts of the world that need it the most.
아하 다단다 데 리치기 중에데 단다 가수근 잠랑 초연 달 하버트 아니 고 뉴어트 코사게 네텔라야 아니 맹기나타 맹기라 예페주통 와티 총요레스.
So it has been well established that most of our medicine is not natural, but rather to a certain degree or very high degree has been genetically modified.
아하 다단다 가수 맹바나 멘티 나네다 고 자차 망부치르와 네랑쇼 마임바 네단다 리치기 중에데 베주통 요레스.
So the controversy when it comes to GMOs and medicine is no longer a natural one in the sense that it is no longer scientific, but rather philosophical concerning ethics and humans.
아하 다단다데 기체시온 스탐발라야 멘타 리치 징우코 기체시온 스탐발라야인데 지금 천릭 테 자마임바로와 가속에 미타 아니 트텐라 소팔라야 그 중간도 유메게 근쪽이 되기에네 지금 다트브그 돌랑 지금 차대기요레스.
And the debate when it comes to the concern of ethics and medicine include the following topics.
아하 다단다 데라야 가속에 맹그나라야 리치 징위지 베초 담마당 텔라야 가속에 다 근쪽이 되기에 네 주식 가치는 거레스.
What is the impact of GMO medicine on the intrinsic value of a natural organism? Another way to rephrase this is how will it impact the worth of an actual organism as a natural organism?
다다다 데카서 그러나 단다게 아니 맹그나라야 리치 징위티 베초 땅와라 텐데 아니 가속에 랑숑기 징위가 렌탕테 스메탕아서 거와 단데 양치 셰바임바이나 단 디나도치 총바임바나 리치 징위티 맹그나텔 두시기 쳬부 총바임바나 다 랑숑기 징위가 렌탕텔라야 아니 토포카나도 친두그레세 테레스.
Is it ethical to be tampering or fusing genes from different species to combine a chimera or a new form which is basically a mixture of all kinds of different genes? Is that okay or is that not okay?
다 senda카서 그래서 스탐발라야 니르 트타네 니르 만도 트라야 리지티 냠시 제발라테네 다 징이 사바치튼 거여와 딘다티온 스탐발라야 데네 근쪽에 테네 셰파이나 드크요레 드크요 마레스 데네 탄차고레스.
For example, there are many examples where we can produce a medicine based on a plant that has been mixed, that has been modified with animal genes. There is something inherently not correct about that, and that is highly, highly debatable.
다 단단가수가 맹이나 죄에게 저상게 되나라야 아니 지금 소착게 리지 냠시 당아 된다는 요레스. 다티 지금 가수 근쪽에 테네 따바임바이나 지금 그 느끼요 말에서 되게 텔라야 돌랑식 전부 주고 요레스.
And that of course ties in with the whole notion of animal rights. Do animals have rights? Should they be just utilized to get their genes to be fused with other species? Is that correct? Is that not correct? There is, again, a topic that is highly debatable when it comes to this particular theme of GMOs.
다단가 수가 지금 징위 개체시온 스탐발라야 데나라야 소착게 저와 소착게 다 던주스나도 그래 소착게 아니 톱통코 개체시온 거레스와 코데라야 소착게 아니 리지테 란데다가 아니 지금 랑 템발라테네 데 단 이리 젠다탄 냠테 테테 당아 요라 요 마레세 쿠슬라티게 톱통 테구레 테구 마레세게 돌랑게 네탄티안 차게 요레스.
What is also very interesting is this whole debate of animal rights highly depends on the type of animal. For example, when we talk about this debate, it's very different to talk about a mammal such as a dog or something that interacts with humans readily. We love dogs, we play with them, they're pets. But when we talk about insects, the debate becomes highly weaker.
다단가 수가 근처 땅 데베게 아니 지금 소착 톱탕 지거라 소착 톱탕 땅 데베게 근처 콜라 개체시온 스탐블라야 지금 소착 거리거리 레메 데라야 지금 라레게 요레스 피차샤바이나 지금 가수 가사게 키도라 첨바이바이나 야 키티 페제 땅 디가 마르스 스탐블라 미마포지 키라가 스탐블라야 에티게 지금 페제 땅 초마촉 근처 데라 랑롱식 치와 요레스 에메나야 티 무슨 게 리티 페제 땅 차요레요 마르스 스탐블라야 티게 텔라야 근처게 지금
So the debate concerns, well, should we be using animals for our benefit without concern for their lives? What do you all think? Let's talk about it for a minute and let me know what you think. Should we be using animals for our benefit, for our purpose?
다다다 delaya nichku socha ki kepen la ya chi yama che de te nga su ki kepen chi te pechu tang ko yorwa ati ni kanadu sam ku du sterwa ni socha ko chu ga socha sena ta tundru gri tang chi bus gri la so parwa ti chama ki kepen la sme tang de tang nga su ki kepen chi te pechu tang na rigor ways.
Talk about it for a minute, discuss it with your groups, and then we can get some opinions.
Nya ti ko la ya ni trete chi ro chis.
Okay,
Raso
what do you think? Maybe hear from a couple of tables?
chichu gonsukaru ne sono chidasa.
Should we use animals for our benefit? Should we experiment on them? Should we use their genes for our benefit? What do you think?
나수게 소초코스 페시탄 거로에스 나수게 페시탄
만주디네 딘디시 줄레 총스로와 빼나 차샤나 딜리아 만주 예투고 넘버 체니 아니 심제 체소든도 다가 두스체베나 디그마레스로와 디 마인바 친론 미기타베 네나 잘라서 딘디기 주연의 펜토 시청부되는 영어이나 아니 디스 진디시나 페신 디기 도마도 예투고 넘버 체나 용한사 마레스
what they have discussed is depend.
My friends, if we're talking, we have to listen, okay? Thank you.
What we have discussed depend on the purpose of the experiment or the use of the animals. For instance, if we are using the research on the animal, gene editing on the animal for the great purpose of treat illness or diseases, that's will be okay for general public. For it is used for your luxurious lifestyle or for fun, it's not okay.
So it depends on how we use it. I agree with that, absolutely. I agree with that.
nganzo cheina cheda cheso grentan chel samda ina ani cheso yoto cho grentan di ani chikwa dan ranyim yinza ani delaya ani cheso jamba jingan zun ro mi che to korje chiina di ranyim chagyo maresra ya rumba nyo samlo tangda chela ke chelu gan samlo tangda chira cheso chik de chik ani nganzo ta pecho ka thani samlo ta ina rentang chani samlo ta ina yan chik rentan chechong wangi phachu ni korje chia de samlo tang chiya sars
If we think about, if we consider on the basis of life itself, every animal said has life.
Right.
So in that sense, it's equal, and we need to consider that as equal.
Right,
But on the
absolutely.
basis of importance or the usefulness, all that kind of characteristics, we can use the less important, less useful for the purpose of the more useful.
Absolutely. And how do we
yeah.
define more important or less important? Is it the fact that we can think? Does that really make us more important? I don't know. That's a really good question.
Try the Abudu stand in Venayanga Sukichiga, get you dance, search or whatever, Kupesh, Mela Super Search or what, or the Karila Shishakures, they are to Atana Kores, some Tanshima Shishakure, Karila Tenishakure, to Atia, Tayores.
And I think about this all the time. Sure, humans have insight, we have foresight, and we have cognitive abilities that animals do not have. But you pose a question, in our planet, who has damaged the planet the most? Us.
aha ta da ya nga sun de samlu tang de re sa chu me ba na chi ka sa samlu ge de samlu tang ai ge ni pa te shi chen bo yo re chi maung pa la ya chi jon bu samlu tang te ni shi chen bo yo re ya ba na samlu shu jen da chi ne tang ba ba na zambu lin di ge ga la ya to chum shi chi shi te si yo re de nga su chi yo re
So sometimes I even think to myself, and I tell my wife, I tell my friends, we don't deserve this planet. We should not be here.
aha and sam la ngarang ge du sam gu du san me ngarang ge jimen ta zada ta de rokpa zula lab ge sta nga so la ngone ta ne de nga so me der wa nga so me de tan de ge su ko la ga ne de chi te re me du nga so la de u ba chi re me du su de lab ge is
Yeah. Good. So we can also think about, the fact that we have lost biodiversity in the animal kingdom. Many animals are about to disappear. Many have completely disappeared. They have become extinct. So how does the use of animals for GMOs and other research impact their biodiversity? That becomes a very important issue in science.
aha ta shenda chi karo re system bala nga su ge ni ru mampu chi kula du go yo re swa system bala ya ani tanda ge tanda jingyu ge thri chi go wa tanda di jingyu thri tanda da ge ri chi ge jingyu ge ri de ani jingyu ge na chu ka ran shin de la ya ani ku shi chin kan ru chi tem re de ne tung ke chem bu chi chag yo re
Good. So a few more points before we jump into our activity for the day, which is going to be basically knowing how to do research across different scopes of science. But just a few more points about GMOs, just to get our head thinking and really become opinionated on the matter of GMOs.
aha da tanda nga chu la ya jegu chik de ba yus jegu te che chu ga ya chi chan ri tan da be ge ani chu ti chöya chi go ro ti ko la yin sta ti ma ti ngo la ya ani nga chu tan da de la ani ru chi ching ge tan de be ge ya chi ani chu jen da kha chi ngo to chi ya yin sta ti ko to che ba ba na su su sam lo na la ya chi da shong ma bu chi shi wa chi cha go wa o te yin.
So for example, insects have become an integral part of research when it comes to GMOs, especially when it deals with modifying an insect for it to be resistant to, say, for example, malaria or dengue or other highly deadly illnesses that impact human populations.
aha da na cha ge ge wa na cha chi ga na cha tak pu ge dengue ta da malaria do do bai bai na de tak ta chi se ge tak she ge thone ane musun ti ke chambu chi cha ge yo res ta ko ge chambu cha ge res na musun ti shi chambu pe chu tang ge yo res ta de ta la ya musun ti pe chu tang de ta dan de do ge na cha ti ching gu chep chi ya la ya gu ni shi chambu ta den ba ge che tro wa o sim chi ge yo res.
So for example, the benefit of utilizing insects as models for GMOs is that we have the potential of eradicating malaria, dengue, H1N1, right? All kinds of illnesses that depend on insects as vectors. So there are potential positives for using insects as GMOs.
da ri chi ge musun chi go wa de la ya ki pen yo res da ki pen yo ba de ka la na ko chi ge de na ru pe che ta de bai bai na de la tene de te ani nga su ta musun gi ani ne ti yang ko res che ba chi ni musun chi go wa de ta sa me zo ba na ne de ta ne pi cha sha ba na nga su ga malaria re dengue re N1 H1 and such or na sa tige riti ko chabden duel and rut kumarwa this tambala dito samesuela ya nga suge richi mbasin du penge yores.
And I pose a question. Again, we'll discuss it for about a minute. Today is all discussion, right? So we'll have another discussion. Could there be a negative consequence to using insects as GMOs? Talk about it for a minute. We'll come back.
Da de la ya Twitter chiens Twitter te kala in system bala ya jindi ngamba shen yore yo mares nga su gum busum te ro busun shi ro busun te ani ruchi chingwe ge na la shimji ge thola ya peche ta ba imba na nin jindi shen ba yore yo mares.
Discuss it. Talk about it.
Kama kashi ching ala Twitter jero chis.
Welcome back. So maybe a table that we have not heard from yet.
아하. 다 뭐마 개체시 메사게 루카시게 개체시로 제스.
What do you think about using insects as GMOs?
Uh-huh.
We know there are positives. Can you think of any negatives?
아하. 다데 ngasu 무슨 데로와 무슨 그래데 리치 칭기 틀라 배치 당바인바나 아니 그 정가리요 레스와 단데 가수 그냥 장차 카치래 지소아. 개체 뭐마 개체
Anyone.
마시 많이 누구로 같이 시로 지스거든.
Thank you. Yes. What do you think?
캔디 데서레스로 간즈나 코랑이다 리기시마 베지다 티직세 아니야 가시아 코랑 디지 나자데 코랑 수고라 마네나 야고 셈보네마도 베드네라
양실라다. 군에 양실라다.
부시 리임바시나로
아하.
코랑 지다 간절라 나자 소에 릭시다
아하.
티 메와 세소나 코랑 셈보네마도 베지 릭시라
아하.
티직세 아니야 코랑
코랑라는 무슨 데라 거라. 아.
부신 코랑 리기시마 베지라
아하.
어디라야 야 겐저드 그랬어
아하.
어디
야.
Anytime I hear laughter, I know there is going to be a good answer. So, what do our friends say?
If you eradicate something, like for instance, the carriers, the malaria carrier mosquitoes.
Anopheles, yes.
If you eradicate the mosquitoes, we are just eradicating the mosquitoes. They cannot reproduce themselves, and their species extinct.
Absolutely. You hit the, as we say in English, you hit the nail right on the head, right?
Uh-huh.
True, we can eradicate Anopheles, which is the vector for malaria, but can we afford to really eradicate a whole species?
아하. 따다 랜드 따다 크레시아 송스로와. 단다 임바나 가수 지금 말라리아티 자메즈와기 체드 베드크로 두당기 니르 간자 지 자메즈나 드그로 있다.
Insects have an integral function for the stability of our planet, the ecology of our planet. If we eradicate insects, we're going to collapse that stability. We can't afford to eradicate whole species. So thank you. That is a very good answer.
아하. that the land pay up on us to chase Kachila by Bananga the Nuchig Mala Chura, Nuchig Mala Tiku Tata Nealaya, and Busungu Kuranga Cheli, Ketchemuchi Drukuyores. The Kating Asum Busungi Nirichi Bete Sameta by Bana, Atsuga Nuchig Mala Tikura, Goton Loyagin Katina Yores, this Tambala Lempe, I just to chase.
Thank you. Anyone else? Any other comments?
Zemba Ayosa. Yeah. We're here. We want
Yeah.
to take it.
And then the Turan rechecking is Venera, T. Kitchen Young as the Naming on the middle of Soja, the Nichira Honzo. Tell it in another Madame de Young Shuris.
Yeah. His answer is the GMO insect, GMO mosquitoes,
Yeah.
they may transfer other diseases.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There could be horizontal gene transfer with other insects, or we could very well be making a new vector for a new illness that we don't know about. Absolutely. Very good answer.
Taranjares Rangasuge, Riziti, Nasuge, Tepu Chigres, in the Shijaso, Dilatendete, and a Kuge, Riziti, Jendala Yate, Jendala Tedeta, Natsula, Ngala Mepage, Nasa Chenigi, Nasa Chenkenchigora, Nasa Yamakinchigora, Tenadu Chebayan, Johnson Paris, Lempe of Johnson's.
So to play devil's advocate, do you know that term, devil's advocate?
I don't know.
To be a cynic, right? To play the other side, for example, on a debate, right? In my opinion, it's okay if we try to eradicate malaria, but we have to do it in a controlled manner and without hampering the ecology of those species. We have to do it in a controlled setting, but let me tell you something. Every time we have tried to do something in a controlled environment, we humans almost always fail.
Tanda de la Yakoyan Chitan Chores, Tatanga Deba in Bana Tanda Netan de Gane, Taku Samel Tamba in Bana no Panetan Sheki or Yadela Yanga Suge, Tanda Netan, Gashoni Langa de Tan Samlatachi or Esra, the Tandanga Suge, Malaria Tawigi, Chinigi, that to don't take Samel Tango by Bana and Tichia Layanko. 당진 약보지니와 아니 거의 다 지금 노치 다 젠달에 두포만루가네 니르 젠달에 두포만루가네 지역에 답는데로 요레스 이메나야 단다빠땅 아수고 지금 천진다 당진 약보가네 지금 노치 다 마테베가네 지금 답심 마부지다 지어다 이메나 지지 차마코라라야 아니 람랑정요 마레스.
Thank you. Very good answers. I love the fact that you make us think so much. And like I said before, you all learn from us, but I think we learn more from you when we teach such classes.
다 단다 데나네 치수가 딜렌드 즈 페야 부첸 상스 다당가 수두스 나라니 젠데 트리피 캅스 치수 나수간 나수 라바데 만코르두스 장고 요다이네 나수 나라니 바나야 치수 산데지 망부치 시송스.
Good. So just to end before our activity, let's go through some ideas on ethics and disease prevention, right? As we were talking about getting rid of malaria and other major illnesses, right? Well, there is an ethical principle that a human life is worth saving. We all agree that we need to protect human lives.
다 단다 데라야 아니 단다가 수카르타게 세나 나차 ngong고 tonde비게 아니 근주기 콜라케 치치시기 인스타데 케제션 스타바 카르스고 세나 미기 치속세디 조르미 요파치레샤세기 지타츠자 치워라데 차마킬렌치기 요레스.
We have to do it, though, like I said before, in a controlled manner, right? We can aim to develop new approaches, new techniques to prevent, to treat illnesses, to eradicate infectious diseases that cause the loss of human life.
다 단다가 수 디레로 드파임바나 치 당진 거랑신 데베가네 치고요레스와 다 단다데 바나가 수 메기 치소 초바치야게 아니 나사티나도 담보 나차 ngong고레 tane 나차 응윈진 치야레 tane 네치 치야레 아니 당진 시에츠고 탈름 티조 사와조라 무구그레스.
But we have to be careful, we have to be conscious about the fact that any technique that we implement has to also take into account that we may be damaging the environment, we may be damaging the ecology of our planet, so there could be other risks that could ultimately come and impact us in a way that we do not want to be impacted.
다 단단 디레로 탑런트 페치 땅비 값은 아수가 현대지 거리 삼땅 거래세나 디레로 peche tanga bala tene nga su ge tene tene khoi tene chi nuchi la so pala ro chi shichen tege dum du shichen ga pa tege dum du se te kan la ya nga su sam tang go yores.
And this brings a point, is saving every human life going against natural selection. That brings a really important point.
Ta dene nga su la chi tra chi le go yores mi chama ta chopki in se ge le ka chi warwa mi 참아기 소쇼크 미 참아 쇼킨 세기 자와데 내가 저 랑숑 뎀티킹 게다레스 랑숑 뎀티키 카텔라 두고 요르웨스 아데네탄 차고레스.
As much as we would love to save every human life, it is not quite natural to do so. It would go against the whole notion of natural selection, and ultimately we are damaging the stability of our human population.
다 지금 배나 가지고 또 미차마 직전이 두고 요레스 임바나 전이 두야게 지금 지금 삼르다 지고 왔대 아니 랑숑가 담디다 아니 잡게 두고 요레스 다 디나도 침바임바나 아니 가지고 또 지금 미기 다 초대 당안에 지금 거의 지고 왔대라 또 폰두고 요레스.
Because if we keep certain strains within humans that should not be kept, we can ultimately damage the stability and diversity of human population, and that could be universally fatal for the human population across the globe.
다다 데레로 라텐데 데테 가수고 지 메트테 녀서치 마로야게 다치 체취드라로 녀서치 와다 아니 차마치 쇼반디라 바이나 마웅바게테 미기 니리 타 치코 나츠코라선 치고로와 데터라야 아니 또 폰도nom세 또 포탕그레스.
So as much as we are humans and we can think and even go against natural selection, we have to be careful not to break every single rule. We have to still keep the rule of natural selection.
다 같이 미레스 미 삼루 땅트비 땅트게지레스 임바이나야 가수고 지 다 지금 춘사마 떠데다 손 담트게 지 카텔 만두야 될라야 가수 잡자 지구레스.
Good?
This is
We're about to end. Final thoughts before we break into our activity, right?
차트 요스다 딩고라야 차트 요스다 가서 되게절라야 제구도고라테 만든 거라야 담아그 삼식 같이
So,
요스
anytime we modify something, herb, a fruit, an organism, an animal, right? We have to be considerate of its ethical components, right? Regardless of where and how that technology is applied. We have to be conscious about the ethical consequences.
한다 단다가 속에 지금 리치기 쟁에게 리치기 지트르기 지고로와 대당가 속에 지상날에 다 삼체날에 로토인 바나 가리가 페쇼 땅고 요바인 바이나야 다 티티 가와 지라야 간데 스페셜 땅그레세 게장초기 차지고로와 대랑가 속가티나 삼라 땅고레스
There are clear benefits and drawbacks, and I hope throughout this discussion we have learned about the potential benefits and negative consequences.
다 될라야 아니 그 기pen단 쩐이요레스 단단가 속에 다 들랑던 진짜 초바 드드지바 될라테네 데테 아니 그 기pen단 쩐이샤네 지 디스카스하고 차려 지요스
So perhaps just by looking at your behavior and your discussions, I may have swayed the room to have a negative attitude towards GMOs, and that's okay.
다 단다 치추글랜 데이터 데라도 치체바이나 아니 지금 리치기 징이게 될라야 아니 지금 가서 그랬다 다지 약부 마세야기 쇼라야 두스 지트바도 지종송스나데 게멘두스
This is very similar to my classroom at Emory. When my students come, they haven't seen this topic. I poll them. In the beginning, they're half and half. Towards the end of the class, they're all against GMOs.
다데 그 상당한테 그 에머리란 전대트바던 로레샤스 담보연스 담발라 그수그 삼쇼디언스 담발라야 리치 징우 그게 지금 삼천즈 당대 제가 오치레도스 에바이나 터치디 트사노고 제라야 그수그 삼라는 저때 참아 리치 징우라야 네 가바장지 차도스
And that's okay. If you do want to continue the debate, just have the knowledge, the information, and consideration on the ethics of using GMOs across our planet.
다데 정나라 디그레 게요 말이스 테케데 저런 게 리치 징이 탄데베기 돌란데 메토드 진이 두 바이만은 디기 거기 시샤다 니수티 하쿠아치 데데 아니 리치 징은 데라테네 데팅한 순 자몽이 최기 용라 아니 케펜다 식징가라도 두고요 메티기 장초 근쪽이 텔라야 아니 도나치 구요레스
And this takes us home to our activity by posing the question, what other controversies that I have not covered can you think of when it comes to GMOs and biotechnology?
다다 데와 데데데 가서 트라지마테 연구요 스타탄다 가서 전단 데나데 아니 리치 징이 탄데베게 뇨타 카치 쿠르치어와 다단다 셴다와 가서 리치 징이 당 징이 트르단 데베게 아니 다 조뇨 가서 전단 안에 것도 마치와 된다 셴다 가리두스
The whole point of our activity is learning how to search the internet, our resources, to find other controversies about GMOs.
다 디카레 시스템 발라탄데 제고 드와디카레인스나 체수가다 트라잘라 소파 페쇼탄데데 아니 디코가 니츠디 아니 쳐야디엔스
So let's take a 2-minute break, just think, clear your mind. We're going to switch topics. So let's synthesize our information of GMOs. Let's take 2 minutes, put your ideas together, and we'll continue our activity.
다단다 가만니스 그라라야 단다 리치 싱이탄 제비게 니츠티 콜라야니 삼로탄치 티치 안직덤도 자로 체스 티 제라야 가서 아니 제구디 드베인스
Okay? So just relax for 2 minutes, think about what you learned, and then we'll continue.
가만니 그라라야 헬레 체치 단다 가서 가리 정여마테 삼로치타로 체스 니 예수 저로 체스 엔데 제라야 가서 제구디 드베인스
Just relax for about a minute or two. Anything you want to add or anything? Yeah, I know. After a while, your buttock starts to become numb.
At lunch, do you want to sit and chat a little bit about the presentations?
Yes.
In the afternoon?
Yes, absolutely. Sure. Okay,
Lasso.
welcome back.
Lasso. That's a level at Tashidelesa.
Did you enjoy your 2-minute break?
Come on, you person to two says.
Not long enough, right? Pretty soon we'll go to lunch, so just bear with us, and soon enough we'll get some non-GMO food in our bellies.
That is Utsutis Jeroches and it is Jelaya Nengaso reaching my big in Shela Chogadosa.
So somebody has a question, so let's listen to the question. Go ahead.
nge di tro karina tanda richi kyenge gi kor di ta kepen de kyondi ndeshimo kyonso ta richi kyenge di kande sanga zo pechan seshin chi ta ben tomato roji richi ta richi kyenge so ala ko gi nalo gi chashi karalan gyo tango ryo ti
Yeah. We have talked about the benefit and negative consequences
Sure.
of GMOs. So, to create a GMOs, what part is modified? How that is done?
How is it done?
Yeah.
Well,
The modification, yeah.
there are many different ways, and that depends on whether you're using plants or animals, right? So it's at the cell level where you extract a gene from a donor and you give it to a recipient. The recipient receives those genes, and those genes become part of the genome of the recipient. So ultimately you have a recipient with a genome that is part original and part new from the other species.
Tata gele kije tete terwanga suga richi chingi te kanda do zugu yores kije trote terwa tanda tati ge lente kanda resena ne chitang bana nga suga rizzi chudu chiate thapung ne babla chigu yores ta thapung ne ba chi stambala nga sula ya rizzi tenyi chitang lenyi chigu yorwa tenyi tige rizzi ge tipcha chi tigerwa ta te pati lenyi tige rizzi ge tichana tele lens ga ta kuna chigu yorwa Jupala Tenedete, and the Lankin Tigi, Taco Casa, touching a Tigi, and a Kurangi Genum Gnalas, Taragasu Rizigana, Rizig Genum Gnala, Cario Resena, and a Kurangi Rizig Tipchayum by Kanskilaya, Shenda Teniti Rizig Tipchatia Yores, let's check it in the Dores, and a Nasuya, Tichitante, social transition in Avenaya, Kumadares.
So it is not uncommon to have a GMO plant with animal genes, or vice versa, to have an animal GMO with genes from plants,
It's
or
uncommon,
fungi,
right?
or other species.
It's uncommon, right?
Yes.
Tandanga Sugaya,
It's not uncommon, yes. So it happens often.
this happens often.
Yes.
Okay. Tandanga Suga, Richie Ching Kishan Stambalaya, Tsingala, Tsing Nalaya, any Sochaki Rizichupata, Tini, any Sochanalaya, Tsing Rizichua, Patsula, Titachua, they young Sichongores.
Make sense? Excellent.
choji
Good. Any other
Georgie.
question? Yeah, question.
tanda di dakanda sa richi jingye la jora tadi zo tanda ging suna chewa na pena tomato khurang ta 70 jindo ta ina sumuda tadi richi jingye che tadi mai ba ya 70 jindo ma ta che tanga na lanji shi jin ro shi pena je da ma boda singa na luye jora dire tab sa jo dige ni pe richi jingye chawe na
His question is about GMOs. What do we consider as GMOs? You have mentioned as, for example, the tomatoes. The seed itself is modified, right?
Right.
If we don't modify the seed, but we modify the other factors like the chemicals that we put in the ground, or the soil, the water. If we modify everything else, not the seed, does that become a GMO?
Very good question. For it to be a GMO, let's look at the word, genetically modified. We are modifying the genome of the species. We can alter the soil, the chemistry, the way it germinates with the amount of sunlight, the amount of nitrogen in the soil. That would not make a GMO until we come in and we modify the genes within the species.
rigzi juji shivi chingi sagwa ta rigji chingi sate rigzi la juji shivi ki chingi ta sagore tis tambala ya kola iga rigzi ti majri henchene kola rigji chingi chagmare sta de la ya ngasu pishashana sa ta le ta nima ta chu ta tene saganano yopiga nitrogen la soba tsu kuga zirgite la kasum ko jura ta bai bai na ya kuga rigzi la yan jura mata henchene na ko rigji chingi chagmare.
So we could modify all kinds of aspects, the physical aspects, but if we do not modify the genes, it is not GMO.
Aha, da nga so chi chi da tunchin chi warwa te re la ya jwa ka so chi tang ba ina ya ko rigji la ya jwa ma ta na ne rigji te rigji gi chingi chag mares.
Good? Excellent.
Can I have a question?
Yeah.
So the points that we have gone through so far, from the ethical point of view, it is like very concernable, since humans are also organism, and the survival concept in biology also applies to humans also. So from that point of view, like these GMO are kind of things that are happening. I think these are like a part of this, part of survival. So isn't it like things that can be done? So like for example, like COVID-19, like it almost like wipe out the earth. So because like it is for their survival, and also like human can do this. So how do we think of from this survival point of view?
Several point of view from the insect or other animals, human.
Nganzo mi samada kengo ji chagora.
Aha.
Kengo ji cha ndo gana kengo nala namyu ngazo da survival of fittest la ji gi namja ji ke ji chagora.
Aha.
Tadi ke ji che ndo gala ta so survival che gi chedu jamuli di gala ne gi chedu.
Aha.
Ta gare ina che gi re la choro.
Aha.
Tadi ndo gala tanda nganzo rigzi chegu che dia ani mi den zo jamulin de gala chone yar ta gi chedu ta dinde gi thapsi chebe chadawu chik dus.
Aha.
Ta dinde ki navja di kone taba ina ro tangjo rigze chigi chewa dia mari pa gare res
Aha.
ta kunju ki tona salo tama ina ta di salo tang ko chik chagi res ro.
Aha. I think you understood the question, right? When he speak Tibetan, I'm just kidding. we in the biology, we have the concept of survival of the fittest.
Right.
To survive, the organism will do anything to
Right.
survive, right?
Yes.
In that sense, the GMO, the technology, is everything is for our survival.
Yes.
So should we think about that from that perspective? Of course, in the ethical perspective, we need to concern all other
All
aspects.
other parties, right.
But from that point of view, survival of the fittest, is that something that we need, like something that we should do to
Right. So
survive?
like I said before, right, as much as we would like to, can we really save every single human? The answer is no. And to add to that is we shouldn't, because that would go against the whole notion of survival of the fittest, right? And you know, this whole notion of Darwinian survival becomes a really murky point when it comes to humans. We are the one species that have been able to counter, you know, the whole notion of survival of the fittest. Otherwise, half of the human population would not exist today, right? Anything you want to add? Right. Anything you want to add to that?
I mean, yes, but it's a long conversation.
It's a very complicated philosophical question.
I think you're getting at goals, you know, like do we want to, as we're making these choices, do we want to just be based off the goals of survival and numbers of survived people, or do we want to think about quality of life that we're providing for other people? And I think also what Miguel did a good job of highlighting is there are things that are beneficial for our survival needs and things that are not beneficial for our survival. So it's a good question with a lot of different aspects to it. It doesn't have your answer.
Long answer.
Oh yeah, very long answer. Now I forgot all the answers. What should I do?
So to make it short, we shouldn't rely on survival of the fittest. We need to be careful, right? We need to follow the natural rule. Yes, we are greedy in the sense that we look out for ourselves, but we need to be very careful as to the extent in which we do so. And we can't and we shouldn't aim to save every single human in the planet. We should not.
Dalodala gilan she len rin tra temba jes ro ta tanda gila so ate che ba bana ngasuge ta de kasa ta ko chutho inshiti nigre se chura suchit kre chingi chi bichane te samlo tang kore simba na ya ta ngasu tige netan te samlo tang stambala ya che ko chingdu se chen jinggu yo res timda ngasu me cha ma dus chopkin se ge netan te na dwa yo mare jo thek ko mare chi gwe yo mare chi da chi rwa tinaya mare swa istambala che sangure sta gela kristo so chi ba bana chitang ge ta te ge rite la ya ngasu ge yoshi nyokta sao chi dolang ge cha shu chambu yo sa tena do chi res istambala ya data la ya chi ko dolang tenda ting sapon do na do yo chi tenda res.
If we think about nature, illnesses, even COVID, right, they're meant to keep the human population in check.
Tanda de la etapa bana ngasu ge na sa ge tan hapar ta tanda ani toi na sa de la ta wi bana ko chungu ro ko ta chi chungu ro sta chungu yo pa te data te ngasu ge ka su re ta mi gi ta ko ge mi gi tambor chi ro wa tambor te ta che ta ta zuya ge che ta do chi res ta ko rang shong ko ke rang shong ge ni ro gong ta ba bana.
So as tragic as it may feel to lose family ones, I lost family members during COVID. Many people did. If we think about it naturally, it keeps the human population in balance, as it should.
Ta da bana ta chichu in bana ji toi na sala tin de to susu ge nyenyi tin do chongwa tin do chong yo chire ngai bana tin do chong song sta mi girl la chong bana ta lu phong tong samba chu go tin do res in bana ya chi ja chi sala song lo tong bana ani nga chu ge chi zamlo jechi ge mimbor ti chi ta ko dunyam zuya chi ro wa ti gi nitang la ya samta yo res.
Good question, though.
Yes, I have a question. Can I?
Yeah.
So, like my profession besides teaching, I'm a farmer myself. So when I was a kid, I remember that, we grow wild strains of corn.
Right.
And like every yield, so every year, we have a harvest or yield, and we can use the same harvest to sow the seed for the next year, and we keep on using that. But I think about 5 years back or nearly 10 years, so this trend has been changing in around Mungod area.
Absolutely.
And we have been using a GM seed, which is manufactured by by Bayer Pharmaceuticals from Germany. So my question is that and on top of that when I was a kid, so the wild corn seed, we can make tsampas. We can make tsampa and we eat. But about 5 years back, so when we sow the GM seed of corn, we don't make tsampa from that. We give it to the feed. We give it as a fodder to the cattle.
Right. So it becomes highly limited, right? And that is one of the side effects of using something that is genetically modified. You may not be able to use it as you did before using the wild strain that was incredibly versatile. So we lose this biodiversity and we lose its potential. And we see that not only in your farm, but we see that everywhere. And that is one tragic consequence of switching to GMOs. I'm very sorry to hear the story.
Tanda ge zuri lagi ti bana ngara de la ya gige chiwa ta nyam to chi chalon chong because simpa chi insta ngoma bana nga su ge ti mami lu to tap ko yores mami lu to tap bana ko ta ran sung mami lu to sta on stambala ya ko loren tu syongu yore ti sabun ti yon che tepche ko thong khong yongu yores ta yongu yo ba de la tende ta nga su ge ne ka sa mami lu to ka samba zu chi sa yores eman ta lung singa chi jila ya ani ko Germany ne nandan chi ya ge tanda ta ko richu gi mamilu to ka samuti tabris ta ti tabala tene dete ani kharichi gore ti tabala tene deta ta ko sayate ko ji tharis ta ko ngasu ga chambaji mi saye che to ko ta samchin la ya ka tu gi che to patresha gi yores ta tin stambala ya ti gi ta lende ka resena ta thara res ngasu richu gi jenge ti gi jiung stambala nga chu ge chi khu ge riga na chukpa chi orwa te tala ya ne to pho chong de ta ne ko ngoma na je pesho chi wa nang je pesho chi mithka ne ta te chong go res ta tin stambala ya de nga chu ge ta ko ge richu ge jinge ge ta shi ching ngem ba ko ta nga chu ge luila ma shong ge shi ching ngem ba res.
Very frequently, with the loss of biodiversity, with the loss of genetic diversity, we also get the loss of function. And as you have seen that firsthand, your corn has lost some of its function.
Aha. Ta tanda nga chu ge richu chingu la tene de ko ge richu chingu la tene de nga chu ge rang shang la yo pe gi chingu ge na chu pe rang shin ti jinwa du go ro ma bu chi la du go ro te la pa la tene de ta nga chu ge rigzi gi na chu rang shin te la du go res. Rigzi gi na chu rang shin te la yong stam bala ya te la te bi gi jele chi go ro jeli gi na chu rang shin pa te la du go res jeli kha chi ga la du go res ta te chorong ge simba ching bi chani tanda ma mi lu to na tham thong ba na je ta rang je chong go res.
Thank you.
To chase?
Okay. So, what are some ways in which we can research some questions? And you will get to do this maybe not before lunch, but after we come back after lunch.
Da de la nga su ge che gu chi de be ins che gu de chi che ba na nga su yin kong so chi ko la ya pe chi che la sa ma re ma ra ba na yin kong jab la ya zombie kap se de be ins.
So the first way is, of course, a peer-reviewed journal.
Da tang bu de che sa ro che sa de tang bu de ka re se na nyam che shi chi bi ge tu tap de res mi jen da ge che shi chi sha ju chi go ro le to da la so pe che shi chi sha ju tu tap de res.
Example, of course, is Nature, Science, all kinds of journals that deal with specific topics within a scientific field.
Da picha cha pa na rong shong sa re ane chen ri sa ge tu tap de da ro wa na thapat de chen ri ke na ne ju ji shi ta pa chi ko la yo zombie ton sa chi go ro tu tap de na ro res.
We can, as we mostly do, look up search engines on the internet, such as Google.
Da shen de ba ra nga chu ge ta tholo yo pi ge ti yo ro social ma la tin da yo ro picha shen Google do pe je ton na res.
We can use popular science magazines, which are not peer-reviewed, such as, very famously, Smithsonian.
Da ya shen da chen ri ke tu tap ke ta shen tin da yo ro wa ko so la ya ni na nyen che ship ti chi yo ma res ro in ba na ya ko ke ta chen bo res de la picha cha pa na nga chu Smithsonian se ge tu tap chi do de tab res.
Or we could look back in time and look at science books.
Da ngo ma ba na nga chu chen ri ke te bi yo ro wa o te la ta res.
And again, science books are not peer-reviewed.
Da de la ngi gwa chi ka res na chen ri ke te te la ya na nyen che ship ti chi yo ma res.
So there are multitude ways of looking up information, and these are just a brief collection of them. There are other ways, but we're going to keep it simple for our activity. Peer-reviewed journals, search engines, magazines, or science books.
Da chi ge ba na chen ri ke ni su ti chhe la ya chi chhe se ge je khong se go ya khong lo la so pa ta pe ha cha ma bu yo re sim ba na ta nga chu che gu ge che te du tab du kha chi la du ta yin sta ti na ne nga chu la na ni che shi chi bi ge tu te che ani ti ge la ya ani ta thon so gu ge che ti ge la ya chen ri ge te pe ke ta chen che ani chen ri ge te ti res.
Anyone want to tell us, just without discussions, anyone want to tell us how are they different?
Da de na ne che chu sha ja la ya Twitter ma chi gu ni ro wa ne de ta la ke per ka de du ne shi ja ni yo es.
Anyone?
Su son na de res ke per ka de du sa. Consent the accuracy of the sources or accuracy of the information.
The accuracy of information can change from resource to resource, absolutely. And we'll discuss each one and how the accuracy can actually change on the way that we use them, absolutely.
다른 자리에서 콘센부 메스 그러와 코나가나 콘센부 메스나 다가 수가 니츠코샤 주테 타타 메스 그러와 대가 수 콘데타라야 아니 그 체프카나도 메타기인스.
So we'll start with the most detailed, which are peer-reviewed journals.
다 당부대가 수가 나니 제시지 디토 코리인스.
Right? Now the whole notion of peer-reviewed, does anybody here know what it means to be peer-reviewed?
peer review 세시도 나니 게 제시 세시도 같이 가리에메 신이에스.
Anyone?
근데 디그 세력 급이나 심지기 덤디노지 통계어라 디 덤디랑라 맞아봐 미 젬바가 딜라 짜르집지니다 냠집지니 짜르집지니 온 짜르집지 살주죠 어딘데 놓지
If someone has some down research and other groups do the same research and review that result.
Absolutely. If I do research on, say, corn, to keep up with the example of corn, and I want to publish my research on corn, well, it gets sent to other researchers that work on corn to check my own research for accuracy.
Tana jares ta piche chapa na ngarangi mamilu to thande gi simji ki chomi chi du sta pattern chi gu yo pa na pattern ma chi nge la ya ne mamilu to thande gi te la taksi chi ni gi san pa jenda chi goro khusu la du stangres na khusu tang de ta ngarangi tramde ta ta rendum du de la che su chi gres.
So this becomes a very rigorous process that checks for failures, limitations, perhaps mistakes that I may have made. And for it to be published, we have to correct any mistakes that are found.
That day, Bana Kogi, Pertumachi, Juru Mampuchi Dugu, Yoresta, Jurun, Titalatina data, Tenalaya, Nitsekarazen Karidu, Notu Karichidu, Yajetango Karichidu, Teta Lasopa, Chigu, Yoresra, and it is Tambalaya ko data J data, Pertumachi, Juratango, Yores.
So although the system is not 100% perfect, we do find and we check for limitations and mistakes.
That under dig in Rotangi Chimalado Chura, Rotachi, the Yantapachi Mare, Simba Nayanga Sugi, Chisha Jugita, Taxi, the Trisha Jugi, Tumtila, Tekarazin Karidu, and the Notu Karichu, the Toilaya Pembuyores.
One of the limitations with working with peer-reviewed journals is that, yes, accuracy is very high, very few mistakes, but they're usually very technical and not easy to understand, especially if you read an article beyond your field of research.
Ta de baina ko yang shenda chi kola ya ta kalkha pu ni tan kari ore sena kola ya kasugure ta juro mampu chi jitsang kola notri nyongwa ko ge ta chete nangton de chi ta ta imba ge se chio yorda imba na ya chi ko lo pick up so ko le kha pu yore ta ko le kha pu yo sang chorang ge takshe chi ya ge chi drum chi chorang ge takshe chi ya ge densen chi gorwa Ti gapigi dinsen shendagi ani chomi tendaro loba imana kwale haja khabu yores.
So let's say if I want to search a topic on brain cancer, which is not my field of research, I may have a hard time reading a peer-reviewed article because it is very, very technical. It is not my field.
You said brain tumor, right?
Yeah, anything beyond my field of scope.
Okay. Ne lepagi tentan debi ani somi tanda ani nyanya chesu chi so chi lo bai bai na te ngarang gi cheli marwas tin stambalaya lo pick up so kualen la ngarang la hachang kal kapon jongres.
So they're highly accurate, they're quite technical. However, they're mostly seen universally as the most concise and accurate way to convey scientific information.
Da ko kasakurata ko ani suti chi takta imbagi cheti thua ani tenda yores chi ya kale le kwa le la sopa kale kapo yorda imbai na ya chi chitang chani chenri ki ni suti pe gi thable yakshi telasgres.
That is due to the fact that the work that has been published has been tested and checked for limitations and mistakes.
Dati kare system balai tanda chorang ki pattern chia gi chomi ti gi jablok na yo pi gi chi chen ke tapla sobate la ya ane ko karsagura dati la ya taksi chi ro cheship chi de te ane notla sobate ko zuchi jabyo cha ane ke chim tanda de ko khonta pu jila sig yores.
You could say, okay, I want to move away from a peer-reviewed article and switch to the mighty Google.
Ta chesuga aleta nani cheshi ti pha chi sha chi tang Google do la na degrees.
Pretty much every human in the planet uses Google, correct?
Ta de ta karsa zamlang kana no me phe chyo ge choni chi ro was yong che ko social mala chires.
If I'm talking to my wife and we are discussing a topic, or a friend of mine and we're discussing a topic, I want to find a date or a fact. What is it that we do? We look it up on Google, right?
당가랑 자다나 두고 토포냠도 지금 조시콜라 케체셰 비캅시 바나이 코다세 탄 장가테나 도치하고요 바나 람성 구구나 소체샤그레스
It is very easy to look up information and find facts.
aha date ko changu ko chitsa batayana ngitentina do selaya chi tabdu shuyores
And one of the benefits is that you could actually use Google to find peer-reviewed articles, not just facts on their own, but other research data found within peer-reviewed articles.
aha ta ko nitsung matina do se zamai barwa ta nanya cheshi chu go zomi tina do yo gugu ji chayores
For the most part, you can trust what Google says, but do we need to be careful? And that is a question that I can pose.
aha ta tandanga sugi chigi imbana gugu na kare yopatla ichichina kores imbana ya kugun jonchak tena yuchugi chigorwa nitsi chigorwa tin jonko kare re se tela ya twatangures
Should we trust 100% of what Google says?
ngasugi gugu na tele ko shaji tele jacha ichichi gugurwes
That's a no, right?
ji gugurwesa
I agree. I think you would also agree. We need to be very careful as to the sources that we use in Google. It's fairly accurate, but we have to be very careful what the resources are.
aha ro danda gugu ga chi tele ya ngasugi chigi imbana ichichina dikore imbana ngasugi kogi tachiga nislansa ge khonde kawade do ro ate kare re do te gala ngasuga zabzo chi gugures
It's very different going to the NASA website, the official NASA website, than going to a website that I made about NASA, right? And that's supposed to be a joke.
aha ta ta de ga tele pe picha sha ba imbana ta nasa se de ari ge ti chi khatrula tin da tanye tirwa re mare mishu pinda tanye ge khu tirwa ta picha mana nasa rangi yongi taja gangla chimba de ta ne ngarangi nasa ge kola trisha jogi taja gangla chimba ni khakar was khepyor was
If you wanted to find information on spaceships, would you go to the NASA website or my NASA website?
aha ta ke ti chorang ge khatu ge kola ya ni chu chi chonde pa na chorang nasa ge jonde taja gandu ge be ngarang ge sha jogi nasa ge taja te gandu bes
Yes. So you could have high accuracy as long as you know that you have to be careful where you're looking.
aha da chola ya chi ni chi khon ta po go yo pa na ya chi ni chi ti chwa cha mai ba ni chi ti chosa ko la cho go du se ti ga za chi go res
And just to take a poll, who in here uses Google to find information every day?
aha da ni ma ta pa this google pe cho ta de ta ni chi choni tin de su yes la ba chang ro jes
Everybody, right? Everybody. Chris, myself, that
Of
one
course,
uses Google.
yeah.
We all use Google, so let's just be careful, okay?
aha nga chu cha ma google pe cho tang go du si ma na za chi go res
So there are certainly benefits, universally used, easy to use. There are some areas that you have to be very careful on the resources that we use to get information.
aha ta de la khipen ta cho ni cha yo re sim ba na ya ta de kap se nga so la khu ge ni chi gu jong khon te ka re ren du se ti thela ya za chi gu res
So we could switch to another type of magazine, not peer-reviewed, but we call them popular science, such as Smithsonian.
aha ta jenda
Very famous.
jenda titub kha chile ke che ge titub ti res ta de la ya nga su gu ta titub tachchen se gre ko la ya na ni che shi chi yo ma res
So they're not quite as rigorous. There is no peer-reviewed, right?
aha ane ko la ya na ni che shi te chi yo ma res
They're usually fairly accurate with their information. You can read an article about, say, killer whales or orcas, and you're bound to get fairly accurate scientific information.
aha ta ko na la ya cha chen ti ko ni su ti chi ta ta kala kan sam yo res ke ti piche sha pa na de la ya well nya chi well chi do wa di ko ga ni su chi shi dru pa pa na ta de ti ti de do ko na lo pa pa na ni su kala kan san ta ta chi chela ra res
And the reason is that even though they are not peer-reviewed by other scientists, there is a lot of competition to get published. And that competition itself tends to choose the most accurate type of articles.
aha ta de la yim ba na ko na ni che shi ta chi yo ma res sim ba na ya ti te de do ge gang la ko ya la ya ko dendu shi chen bu yo res ta dendu shi chen bu yo cha ane dendu te la ten de tan de gang la ko ya ge te chomi gi ba na ta chi ta ta yim ba shi chi wa chi go ra ta o te ni su khon de ya bu yin ju ti ko res
So the selection process for getting publications in popular science can find mistakes, although it is not 100% perfect.
다 단다 데 코란 담디 지야치 코란 렌드 이스탄불 렌드 치고로 담디 지야게 주름 티나네 코게 치 노트 탄스 노트 자야다 츠베 조초코 요레스 임바나 데 갑스야 노트 지야라 페치데 땅고데 임바나 자차자 탁토 임바티나 마레스.
One component which really distinguishes popular science versus a peer-reviewed like Nature is that in Smithsonian, you're bound to get articles that are mixed with emotional feeling from the authors.
Dinda do wa Smithsonian tanda tutip dinda do chi ani tutip chenda tanda nga su ge nani cheshi chu ge tutip ta ani chi chepen je ge su chi ka re se na tanda tutip di bai na taching ge tutip di na la ya ani ser ke jotan chi jo pa ta ani su su ge nyong su ta de chi de se ja yo res.
And they pose this question: is it okay to mix emotion with a scientific article?
Ta dela ya trust yo res ta nga su scientific ta thambe ge somi chi yo pa na tina tele nga su ge senyong chi go nga su nyong sur chi go wa ti ta na digre ways.
Do you want to talk about it? Should I take a poll? Who says yes? Thumbs up.
Digre ways Chenri ki somi na la ya sro nga su ge senyong su su ge nyong sur ti ta na endu sa.
Okay, so for the most part, it's probably not okay. It introduces bias. We probably want to move away, right? But you're bound to get those levels of emotions in popular science.
Ta sirgi bana nga su chenri ki ko somi chi bana tanda nga su ge chowa tang tina do yong yo ma wa tin bana nga su ge chika su ge choseng ge namba ti yong go yo wa re ma re imbai na ya tanda nga su ge ta choseng ge chenri ti tin na do imbai na ko somi na tele su su ge yong wa tang chowa tang su nyam nyam la so pa do station degrees.
One major benefit, if we compare peer-reviewed articles with popular science, is that they are far easier to understand.
Ta nga su nanyen cheshi chi ti te na ko chu go som tang dur bai na tanda ge ta ko dina do ta ka sa chenri ti ta chche na chu go somi ti pe te lo ha yo res.
I could very easily pick up Smithsonian, find an article about volcanoes, which is not my topic in science, and easily understand it and get a sense of what volcanoes are all about.
Ta ngara imba na tanda Smithsonian ki titen dina do chilan di na ne ani miri ora miri volcano ora miri tan de wi ki somi chi ko lo bai bana miri te ngara ge cheli gi jansa chi maro ayim bai na ya miri gi ko ge som chi lo bai bana miri kari imba tan kana do chi imba ge chi ni suti ngala kala kasa ya go ra ngi ha kut kres.
So there are certainly benefits to choosing popular science versus highly technical peer-reviewed articles.
That things tambalaya tanda ge taching gi tutep ta karsa nanya cheshi chi wi gi chari gi tutele ne taching gi tutende dem bai bana ko lai khipen yores.
And the last one that I will talk about, another potential resource, is published books.
Da chendete kare la na chari gi tebres.
We can find them in any libraries. We can go back in time. We can find books from centuries ago. They contain a wealth of knowledge. All of you use books for your own studies in Buddhism.
Da tutep de chari gi tebe bana chari gi tebe nga su kasa ko la ragres da tanda pinjana na yore ani pe ture chinich ko ngala do bai bana ko su ge chari gi tebe re tina tele ani su pe cha champu ani su mampu chi dus ko chi yore te se chu bana ya ji na chi dis jump pick up se te pe tang yores.
So this is by far the oldest way to transmit information, especially scientific information.
Da de bana nga su ge rignish ta la pa de chenri te jupe chi ge thallam ning shi chi res.
What is unique about books is that you can find a range of not so technical books to highly technical books, almost to the level of peer-reviewed articles.
Da de na la ya chorang ge chi kanad deb ge na ta bai bana khashi chi li lo yu pa ka shi la khashi ya ko ni ku ga ni se te ya ta ta me pa ni ta ta yu pa ta ko ge che ti se ko khashi bana pe te ko na ni che shi chi wi ge so ik chelal he pa tin da do ge so ya char ki te na na ni gres.
But unlike peer-reviewed articles, books do not go through the process of peer-reviewed, so they do not go through that rigorous component of finding mistakes.
Da de bana char ki te bi bana de la ya nga su na ni che shi du go yo mare du me stam bala ya ko no tu che ge jirun ta chi ko jirun ma pu chi go do tin de je yo mares.
And there is a very high range of finding books that are not accurate at all to very accurate books. Again, not technical, highly technical, not accurate, very accurate. You have to be very careful on how you choose your books.
다 차리기 바나 코게 체다 틱틱sel라데 타타 이메 체스고 타타 이메게 체데 니수쿠토시에데 타타 이메 체데 베데
Want to add anything?
최니 코 타타 menjuto ane 베테 베테 하츠 차마 타타 인주티나 노요레스 티스타발아야 차리기 때 뎀비캅세요 잡자치고레스.
Language-wise, books are fairly easy to read, again, with the range of, they can be not so technical to highly technical, and the highly technical books can sometimes be difficult to read.
local haya te yang sirge bana local haya re simba na yang ku teb ge ji ku teb la ya teb ge mando la re le de ta khasim bana ji local hau ta khasim ba de chön ni lo thaw me jo lo siu khapun ju tina yo res.
All right, I'm giving you a lot of information. We spoke about GMOs, about ways to find scientific information.
da nga su ne su mampu chi de se ji sha yes je la ri chi ge jing kon de se je yo re ane ni su kan da do so mu so ti ko ki se yes.
So before we break for lunch, let me just tell you what we hope to do when we come back.
da nga su pasama ta ngo la ya ane ning kong ge je la nga su ka ri chi ge me ti ko la de se ja ge yes.
You're going to, within your tables, within your groups, you're going to spend the first, I would say, 20 to 30 minutes researching one of the following controversies. Or you could also find your own controversy with GMOs.
nga su chul hebi ka su ane che chu tokse su ngone che gu de yes nga chu ge ta ni chu jong khon chu to ga te pe chu tang de ta ane zonyo de ko chana de gre yam na su ge ya jende te ga chana de gre.
You could choose risk of producing GMOs, GMOs and negative impacts on insects, risk of mixing genes within species, risk of consuming, ingesting GMOs, or other risks and benefits, or find your own controversy that you want to talk about.
ta tanda joshi de la ya mando nga chite do de chana de gre che chu ge su ge jenda tin de chana de gre speech cha pa ba na richu ge shin to ta ngu che ge thun chi chi ba ge nyen kha kari yores richu ge shin ge ta basala popik shiching em ba kari yores rigji se bala ten de ta ko nyen kha kari yores richu shin ge te khalala system ba na sa ba im ba na nyen kha kari yores ni shenda yang ko nyen kha ta khipen kari yore che chu ge yang chi chenji tu ni ji ro de chana de gre.
Okay. You can use all kinds of different things. Publish peer-reviewed journals that you find on Google, right? You could use a Google search engine, public and private web pages, that's perfectly fine. But you have to keep a list of all the sources that you use for your project.
어때 네스티 체위 값스러워 저게 아니 나니 제시 지위기 때는 거 종이 되는 로 페이지 땅나는 거래 다티 차라도 구글 페이지 땅나는 거라 구글 간다 차요래 아니 가서 다 퍼블릭 시스템 마부 페이지 땅나죠 아만타 게기타 제때는 로 페이지 땅나 디그레스 다 지야테 칼시고레스 시수가 네스 차거와 네스 차와 간실라 아니 저런 그다 콩롱 가리가리 임바데 참마게 땅투녀 구글레스.
So once you find your controversy and you start searching your controversy, you're going to make a 3 to 5 minute presentation on PowerPoint, or you could also make a poster or anything of your choosing.
다다다 제속에 다다데 전용으로 도와라 리치 싱은 던데 전용식고 콜라야 니스 사고라 니스 사누고 질라야 제속에 कर्मा스니 कर्मा가 그랑라야 데세자게 아니 lokton yenrik chenteso PowerPoint presentation yorwa otinado chi ko chi guyo tadi chi guyo ote lokton yenrik chenter china digre yamra chesugo poster se gro nga su jerigin do zuach gro otinado zuna digres.
Apart from researching your controversy, you have to tell us how accurate your information is, which is based on which resources you used.
다 단다도 텐도 체치 무토 치자 마이 바치데 초롱게 니스티 콩롱 가스거다 코 니스티 타타 가츠치레세 티 데세자고 요레스 콘 코가 니스티 타타 예멘세티 칼라라레그레스나 니스티 코아니 레멘라라레그레스.
So ultimately you want to explain to us if you agree or disagree with the use of GMOs.
다 되게 제라야 초롱게 리치 싱고테 페치 치멘텔라야 초롱게 킬렌 치멘티 데세자고레스.
Be creative and explore different ways to search your controversy.
다 세트 그룹 봐서 그러다 트램 가서 텐지 고부서 그러다 트램 고부지 데데 네 니츠 저야 그 타변데 나 초바치 페이지 당로 제스.
So then what we'll do is we'll choose a couple of projects and you will present it to us.
Ta nga su te na ne ane ruka khachi dam de te ane che su da la ngutu che chi ga yes.
And when we come back, after we have a couple of presentations, we do want to hear a student debate.
Ta nga su ge khachi ke dus tam she chinu ge je la ya ne nga su ge kusho khachi chi dus ten chi de ta ane ruchi chi ko la ya dolan chi ga yes.
So somebody, we have to pick two people and we can start thinking on who. Somebody is going to be for and somebody is going to be against.
Ta nga su dolan chi kap se ta su da me ha ko ma res nga su ni den te chi ke ruchi chi ngu de la ya ane ko ya pu re se chi she ta che da ge ka pa ja ti chi go wa.
As you know very well, better than us, debating is a very powerful way of sharing and conveying information, especially in science.
Ta da nga su dolan che te ane ko che ge ni su che pe che ta ha par te chen kana ne ni su che pe che ge ta ya ko chi res.
I welcome you, if you want to challenge yourself, I welcome you to take the point of view which is against your own. So if you disagree with GMOs, try to debate on the side that you agree with GMOs.
Ya ke te su su do shok ge lang sho ta ya ko jam ge chi de ta tinda dolan chi yo pa na de la ya ne ka su ta ne len chi ge ins phap su chi ge ins tap ti ka su ko sa na ne su su gu do pa jo ta su su gu do pa na ne ri chi chi nge la ya ga pa ja ge yo pa na na dolan ji bi kap se de la ya ga pa ma je che ne jap chu chi ya chi go wa jap chu chi de ta ane tu su dolan chi ya chi go wa o tinda chi ge yo pa na ya te na na di res.
And after we're done with our debate, we're going to end our class with the after class poll to see how the class opinion has shifted from the beginning of class till now.
Ta dolan chinu ge je la ya nga chu gen zda ge samsho chi de ge yin samsho te chanu ge la de ji de te nga chu de joshi te ngutu ma chi go ngong ge ne samsu ta joshi de ngutu chinu ge je la ya sams like khabar kan du de te ta yin.
So for now, go to lunch, start thinking about your controversies. We'll come back in 3 hours at 3 p.m. We'll start our projects, we'll have our debate, and we'll take our end of the class.
Ta da te shela ko percent la phes ne so song ge jile nga so jame yes ta ti paro te la ya ni su su ge richi singe tan de bi ge so nyo ko la sam ta chi es ne ti ge jela ya nyong kon jam sta bala nga su ge ne du go du yes.
So we're all very hungry. Get that energy. When we come back, I want to see us all with high levels of energy.
Ta to ko to yo sa res ne nyong shela che chin nyong ko jab lan zda pheong sta bala sama chi to ri chi chi phe ro chi sa.
Thank you all. I'll see you all in 3 hours.
Oh ya
you.
tu che
Thank you.